Israel, which illegally occupies the West Bank, even under the very light standard of international law, declared that Palestinians in the West Bank, or rather people who are in love with Palestinians in the West Bank, must report to the Israeli Defense Ministry, like to declare their relationship, I guess. And then once they have declared their relationship, if they get married, they will be forced to leave the West Bank after 27 months for 1.5 years. Truly incredible. Like, the fact that they even think about things like this kind of gives the whole game away, right? Like, you put this into the wider context, it's not just this sort of thing. And by the way, they caved into pressure very quickly. Like, after the international the PR shitfest they had, they removed this rule, which they never had any right to implement, because they're occupying the fucking West Bank illegally. It's a military occupation. Who the fuck are they to tell a Palestinian living under their occupation who they can and can't marry or whatever? And yeah, this puts it into the context of this being a crackdown on foreigners and diaspora or refugee Palestinians wanting to move back to Palestine. Israel wants to stop that as much as possible, because Israel, this is very important, this is what you have to put this into the context of. In Israel, they have something that they call a demographic problem. What they mean by that is that there are too many non-Jewish people in Israel, aka not just in Israel, but in Israel occupied territory as well. And they're deathly afraid that Israel will no longer be a so-called Jewish state, because there will be too many of those inconvenient Palestinians there. This is a mainstream political current. They talk about it openly. Politicians from the supposed left in Israel, all the way to the right, they're all in agreement that Israel must remain a majority ethnically Jewish state, and that measures must be taken to ensure this. This is one of those such measures, to try and ensure that, less people living in Palestine, less people are having relationships with Palestinians, less people are having Palestinian children. That's what it's all about. And, because their primary concern with them potentially annexing, like the West Bank, for example, is that in doing so, that there'd be Palestinians there and they need to deal with them somehow. They don't want to accidentally annex the West Bank and be like, whoopsie, we got to give these people citizenship now. They're not Jewish. Whoops, our country's no longer majority Jewish. We're not an ethno-state anymore. Whoopsie. They are definitely fucking afraid of that. And that's what this is all about. It's one small part of a much wider campaign, of a much wider mainstream current in Israeli society and politics of ethnic supremacy, basically. Ethno-nationalist population engineering. Hold on, I want to provide an example. And yeah, so here's a bit of context for that. This is an opinion piece written by Yair Golan. He's a supposedly left-wing politician for the supposedly left-wing party, one of the most left-wing parties aside from the Arab parties in Israel, called Meretz. And he wrote this opinion piece in Haaretz, and I quote, explaining why he's against the occupation of Palestine. He says, the annexation of millions of Palestinians, even without Gaza, will bring the demographic balance between Jews and Arabs to about 60-40. How will Israel, the national home of the Jewish people, look with 40% of its inhabitants Arabs, more than half of them denied civil rights? How will Israel look with 2.6 million more Palestinians, most of them miserably poor in Israeli terms? Anyone who wants the wholeness of the population chooses separation. Anyone who desires a national home for the Jewish people, a state with a solid Jewish majority, chooses separation. Anyone who aims to raise generations of young people in Israel, not busy morning till night controlling a large and hostile civilian population, chooses separation. So, yeah, this thing with the passes to love a Palestinian love permission. This is not just a whoopsie by, some right-wing government party or institution or whatever. These sorts of measures have a broad consensus across Israeli society and Israeli politics. They might disagree in the methods taken, but all of them agree in the end that Israel needs to remain a Jewish majority ethno-state, a Jewish supremacist ethno-state. This guy, who is supposedly a left-wing politician from the supposedly left-wing Meretz party, just fucking told you that straight up. In any other context, if you heard shit like this, the average person would recognize it for what it is. But in the case of Israel, the blinders go on, and somehow shit like this is just so mainstream and normal that they write opinion pieces in like the newspaper of record of the country, and they frame it like it's something totally normal. Absolutely insane.